Good evening. Tonight we're entering a hidden chamber sealed for 1,000 years, where time itself becomes treasure. Everyone thinks archaeological discovery means digging up the past. But Wang Yuanlu's trembling candle revealed something far more profound. That heritage is a living conversation between what was and what could be. Just a story of a monk's broom, scattered manuscripts and museum galleries, and the understanding that memory requires guardians to become legacy. If you find magic in these journeys through cultural preservation, I'd appreciate a like and subscribe. Drop a comment about which discovery moved you most. There's something wonderful about knowing we're all custodians of stories that transcend our individual lives. So dim the lights. Let's begin with the gentle scraping of a worn broom against ancient stone. As dawn breaks over the Mogao caves and a Taoist monk unknowingly approaches the greatest library discovery in human history. Chapter 12. Enduring Stories and Imagination, the Silk Road and World Heritage. In the hushed stillness of a summer dawn in 1900, the only sound breaking the silence at the Mogao caves was the gentle scraping of Taoist monk Wang Yuanlu's worn broom against ancient stone. The cliffs rose like golden towers from the desert floor, their faces pierced by hundreds of cave entrances that had housed Buddhist devotion for over a millennium. Wang, middle-aged and weathered by years of tending these forgotten sanctuaries, moved with the slow deliberation of one who understood that time itself was his greatest enemy and ally. The morning light caught the faded pigments on cave walls as Wang worked his way through Cave 16, a modest shrine chamber that had drawn his attention for weeks. Something about the proportions seemed wrong. The space felt smaller than it should, given the architectural logic of the other caves. As his broom struck the wall behind the main altar, the sound that echoed back carried a hollowness that made Wang pause mid-sweep. He ran his weathered fingers across the painted plaster, following hairline cracks that seemed too regular, too purposeful to be mere age. The wall decoration here was different too, less sophisticated than the magnificent frescoes in the larger caves, almost as if someone had hurriedly sealed something behind a makeshift surface. Wang's heartbeat quickened as he realized what centuries of pilgrims and monks had missed. This was not a wall at all, but a carefully concealed doorway. When Wang carefully picked away the brittle plaster that had hardened like stone over the centuries, the opening revealed darkness deeper than night. The chamber beyond was barely large enough for a man to stand upright, yet as his candle flame pushed back the shadows, it illuminated something that defied comprehension. The narrow space was packed floor to ceiling with bundles wrapped in silk cloth, scrolls secured with ribbons that still glowed with color, wooden boxes sealed with wax that had hardened but not cracked in the desert's perfect preservation. The first scroll Wang lifted seemed to whisper as silk brushed against silk. When he carefully unrolled it, golden characters gleamed on indigo paper, a Buddhist sutra copied in precious metal ink, a treasure beyond the dreams of emperors. The candlelight revealed Chinese text flowing in perfect calligraphy alongside Sanskrit verses, their meaning flowing across linguistic boundaries as smoothly as silk itself had once crossed continental divides. But this was only the beginning. As Wang explored deeper into the hidden chamber, his trembling candle illuminated wonders that chronicled 1,000 years of Silk Road civilization. Here was a silk banner depicting the Buddhas surrounded by bodhisattvas, their faces painted with such delicacy that they seemed to breathe in the flickering light. There, a letter written in Sogdian script on paper that felt supple as skin, describing trade negotiations between Samarkand and Chang'an. Nearby lay musical scores with notation systems that would revolutionize understanding of medieval Chinese court music, alongside Tibetan manuscripts that preserve teachings thought lost forever. The air in the chamber carried scents of sandalwood and aged silk, of paper made from mulberry bark and inks ground from minerals that had traveled the same routes as the merchants who commissioned these works. Every item spoke of journeys undertaken and cultures encountered, of Buddhist monks copying sutras by lamplight, of Confucian scholars preserving classical texts, of traders recording contracts in multiple languages because business transcended the boundaries that divided kingdoms. Among the most remarkable discoveries were documents that revealed the daily reality of Silk Road life with unprecedented intimacy. A letter from a Sogdian merchant to his business partner described the delayed arrival of a silk caravan due to political tensions between local rulers. A Buddhist pilgrim's travel diary recorded the difficulties of crossing mountain passes while carrying precious manuscripts. A Chinese official's report detailed the customs procedures for foreign merchants entering Tang Dynasty territory, complete with tax rates for different categories of goods. Wang realized he had stumbled upon something far greater than individual treasures. He had discovered the collective memory of Silk Road civilization, preserved in a time capsule that transformed Cave 16 into a medieval internet of cultural exchange. Here was proof that the ancient world had been connected by networks of trade and learning far more sophisticated than modern scholars had imagined. The chamber contained over 40,000 items, spanning nearly a millennium, making it the largest repository of medieval manuscripts ever discovered. The monk understood intuitively that these materials belonged not just to China, but to the world. The languages represented included Chinese, Tibetan, Sanskrit, Sogdian, Turkic, Hebrew, and others he could not identify. The artistic styles blended Buddhist iconography with Central Asian motifs, Chinese techniques with Persian sensibilities, creating visual languages that transcended any single cultural tradition. This was heritage that demanded preservation and study by scholars from every nation whose ancestors had participated in the Great Continental Exchange. When British archaeologist Aurel Stein arrived at Dunhuang 7 years later, following rumors of Wang's discovery that had spread through scholarly networks from Beijing to Oxford, he found the monk conflicted between desire to preserve the treasures and uncertainty about how best to serve their legacy. The negotiations between Stein and Wang, conducted through interpreters in the shadow of the cave cliffs, represented a microcosm of the complex cultural negotiations that had always characterized Silk Road encounters. Stein's eventual acquisition of thousands of manuscripts and artifacts for the British Museum sparked controversies that continue to this day about cultural patrimony and museum ethics. Yet it also ensured that Silk Road heritage became truly global, inspiring scholars across continents to piece together the intricate story of how ancient civilizations had created the world's first intercultural network. The medieval foundation of memory. The transformation of lived experience into lasting cultural memory began long before Wang Yuanlu's discovery, rooted in the medieval tradition of travel literature that gave voice to the Silk Road's human dimensions. In a stone cell in Genoa during the winter of 1298, two men from very different worlds collaborated to create one of history's most influential books, never suspecting that their prison memoir would inspire exploration for centuries to come. Marco Polo, the Venetian merchant who had spent 24 years traversing Asia, sat across from Rustichello de Pisa, a professional writer of Arthurian romances who possessed the literary skills to transform raw experience into compelling narrative. The contrast between them was stark. Marco carried memories of silk-draped palaces and desert caravanserais, while Rustichello specialized in tales of knights and courtly love. Yet their collaboration would prove that the reality of Silk Road experiences surpassed any fictional adventure. The process of creating the travels of Marco Polo revealed the medieval understanding that memory required structure to become heritage. Rustichello, experienced in organizing complex narratives for aristocratic audiences, helped Marco arrange his vast collection of experiences into a coherent journey that readers could follow from Venice to Beijing and back. They worked by candlelight through the cold Mediterranean winter, with Marco describing the scent of Javanese spices, the sounds of Hangzhou's busy waterways, the textures of Mongol felt tents, while Rustichello captured these sensory details in prose that made distant lands tangible to European imaginations. The book's immediate popularity revealed medieval Europe's hunger for knowledge about the wider world. Manuscript copies spread rapidly through networks of merchants, nobles, and scholars who recognized that Marco's account offered practical information alongside exotic entertainment. Venetian traders consulted the book for details about Asian markets and currencies. French nobles marveled at descriptions of Kublai Khan's court ceremonies. University scholars in Paris and Oxford analyzed Marco's observations about Chinese technology and administrative systems. Yet the travels represented only one cultural perspective on Silk Road heritage. While Marco Polo was composing his European bestseller, scholars in the Islamic world were preserving their own rich tradition of travel literature that offered different insights into the same geographical and cultural networks. The tradition of rihla, or journey literature, had deep roots in Islamic culture, emphasizing spiritual as well as physical travel and viewing exploration as a form of religious education. The most extraordinary example of Islamic travel literature emerged just 30 years after Marco's imprisonment, when another remarkable individual began an even more extensive journey across the Silk Road world. In 1325, a young Moroccan scholar named Abu Abdullah Muhammad ibn Battuta set out from Tangier on what he planned as a simple pilgrimage to Mecca. Instead, his travels expanded into a 30-year odyssey that covered over 117,000 kilometers and touched every corner of the medieval Islamic world, from Andalusia to China, from the Volga steppes to the Maldive Islands. Ibn Battuta's motivations differed fundamentally from Marco Polo's commercial interests. As a qadi, or Islamic judge, Ibn Battuta traveled to deepen his understanding of Islamic law and culture across diverse societies. His perspective emphasized the unity of Islamic civilization, while documenting the rich variety of local customs and traditions that characterized different regions along the Silk Road. Where Marco Polo marveled at exotic differences, Ibn Battuta often found familiar patterns of Islamic scholarship, legal practice, and religious devotion that connected communities across vast distances. The composition of Ibn Battuta's Rihla mirrored the cross-cultural collaboration that had created Marco Polo's travels. After returning to Morocco in 1354, Ibn Battuta was commanded by the Marinid Sultan Abu Inan to dictate his experiences to the scholar Ibn Juzay al-Kalbi. Like Rustichello's work with Marco Polo, Ibn Juzay's collaboration with Ibn Battuta involved transforming oral memories into literary form, organizing decades of experiences into a narrative structure that would serve both as entertainment and education for readers. The Rihla provided perspectives on Silk Road heritage that complemented and sometimes contradicted Marco Polo's observations. Where Marco emphasized the wealth and power of Chinese civilization, Ibn Battuta focused on the scholarly traditions and religious practices he encountered in Islamic communities throughout Asia. His descriptions of Delhi's madrasas, Samarkand's libraries, and Damascus's mosques revealed networks of learning that paralleled the commercial networks described by European travelers. Both Marco Polo and Ibn Battuta understood that their travel accounts served larger purposes than personal memoir. They were creating literary monuments to the cultural exchanges that had shaped their world, preserving knowledge that might otherwise vanish as political circumstances changed and trade routes shifted. Their books became foundational texts for understanding how medieval people conceptualized cultural difference and similarity, how they navigated between local loyalties and cosmopolitan experiences. The influence of these medieval travel accounts extended far beyond their immediate historical periods. Christopher Columbus carried an annotated copy of Marco Polo's travels on his westward voyage, believing he might encounter the Asian civilizations that Marco had described. Islamic scholars continue to consult Ibn Battuta's Rihla for information about trade routes and cultural practices across the Dar al-Islam. Both books inspired subsequent generations of travelers, merchants, and explorers who sought to retrace their routes and verify their observations. Medieval readers understood these travel accounts as more than entertainment or practical guidebooks. They represented a new form of cultural memory that transcended local traditions and national boundaries. Through Marco Polo's Venetian perspective and Ibn Battuta's Moroccan viewpoint, readers could imagine themselves as participants in a larger world of cultural exchange that connected continents and civilizations. The books democratized travel experience, allowing sedentary readers to participate vicariously in the adventures and discoveries that characterized Silk Road journeys. The collaborative nature of both texts also established patterns that would influence subsequent travel literature for centuries. The combination of experienced traveler and skilled writer became a standard model for producing accounts that balanced accuracy with readability. The emphasis on sensory details, cultural observations, and practical information created templates that later explorers and anthropologists would follow when documenting their own encounters with unfamiliar societies. The archaeological Renaissance. The scientific study of Silk Road heritage began in earnest during the 19th century, when European colonial expansion brought Western scholars into direct contact with ancient sites and artifacts that had been preserved in Central Asian deserts for over a millennium. What emerged was a new form of cultural archaeology that combined scholarly investigation with imperial ambition, creating museum collections that made Silk Road heritage accessible to global audiences, while raising complex questions about cultural ownership and preservation. The transformation began with Ferdinand von Richthofen, a German geographer whose travels through China during the 1860s and 1870s revealed the historical significance of ancient trade routes connecting East and West. When Richthofen coined the term Seidenstrasse, Silk Road, in 1877, he was attempting to capture the romantic appeal of ancient commerce, while providing a scientific framework for understanding how goods, ideas, and cultures had moved across Eurasia. His scholarly maps and publications introduced European audiences to the geographical logic of continental trade networks, sparking academic and popular interest in exploring these ancient routes. The archaeological potential of Central Asian sites became apparent through the discoveries of local residents who found ancient artifacts eroding from desert dunes and cliff faces. In Khotan, Turkestan, and Dunhuang, local people had long collected ancient coins, manuscripts, and textiles that appeared after sandstorms, understanding their value primarily as curiosities or sources of precious materials. When rumors of these discoveries reached scholarly networks in Europe, they triggered what historians would later call the Great Game of Central Asian archaeology. Aurel Stein emerged as the most systematic and successful of the archaeological expeditions that converged on Central Asia during the early 20th century. A Hungarian-born British citizen with training in classical archaeology and Oriental studies, Stein understood that the dry climate of the Taklamakan Desert offered unprecedented opportunities for preserving organic materials that would have deteriorated in more humid environments. His three major expeditions between 1900 and 1916 transformed understanding of Silk Road civilization by recovering thousands of manuscripts, textiles, and artifacts that documented cultural exchange across nearly 2 millennia. Stein's most dramatic discovery occurred during his second expedition when he reached the Mogao Caves at Dunhuang in 1907. The negotiations with Wang Yuanlu, the Taoist monk who guarded the library cave, required delicate cultural diplomacy that revealed the complex nature of archaeological work in politically sensitive regions. Stein's journals describe the careful process of examining manuscripts by candlelight in Wang's presence, gradually building trust that allowed him to acquire representative samples of the collection for scholarly study. The manuscripts and artifacts that Stein transported to London revolutionized European understanding of medieval Asian history. The British Museum's Stein collection included Buddhist sutras copied on palm leaves from India, Manichaean texts written in Middle Persian, Christian Gospels translated into Sogdian, and Confucian classics annotated in Chinese. The diversity of languages and religious traditions represented in the collection demonstrated that Dunhuang had served as a cosmopolitan center, where multiple civilizations encountered and influenced each other. French archaeologist Paul Pelliot arrived at Dunhuang shortly after Stein's departure, bringing linguistic skills that allowed him to identify the most significant manuscripts in Wang's remaining collection. Pelliot's photographs of the library cave, taken before the manuscripts were removed, provided crucial documentation of how the materials had been stored and preserved. His selections for the Bibliothèque Nationale included some of the earliest printed books ever discovered, establishing the importance of Chinese technological innovations for world history. German expeditions led by Albert von Lecoq and Albert Grunwedel focused on sites in the Turfan Basin, where they discovered wall paintings and sculptures from Buddhist monasteries that revealed the artistic synthesis characteristic of Silk Road culture. The frescoes they removed to Berlin museums depicted Buddhist narratives rendered in artistic styles that combined Indian iconography, Persian decorative motifs, and Chinese painting techniques, creating visual languages that transcended any single cultural tradition. Russian expeditions under Sergei Oldenburg and Pyotr Kozlov explored sites in Chinese Turkestan and Mongolia, collecting materials that complemented the discoveries made by their European colleagues. The international nature of these archaeological expeditions reflected the global significance of Silk Road heritage, while also revealing the competitive dynamics of early 20th century scholarship and diplomacy. The transportation of thousands of artifacts to European and American museums sparked immediate scholarly excitement and long-term cultural controversies. The British Museum's Stein galleries opened to enormous public interest, with visitors marveling at silk banners that retain brilliant colors after 1,000 years in desert caves, and manuscripts written in languages that required new scholarly specializations to decipher, and at Buddhist sculptures that revealed the international character of ancient religious art. Scholarly institutions responded to these discoveries by establishing new academic disciplines that combined historical, linguistic, and archaeological approaches to understanding Silk Road civilization. The School of Oriental and African Studies in London, Harvard's Department of Far Eastern Languages, and the Sorbonne's Institute of Oriental Studies developed programs that trained generations of scholars to work with the multilingual and multicultural materials recovered from Central Asian sites. The preservation techniques developed for Silk Road artifacts also advanced museum science more generally. The challenge of conserving silk textiles that were over 1,000 years old required new approaches to environmental control, chemical analysis, and restoration that influenced how museums worldwide cared for organic materials. The International Dunhuang project, launched in the 1990s, created digital archives that made high-resolution images of manuscripts available to scholars globally, while preserving the originals from damage caused by repeated handling. Chinese scholars initially had limited access to materials collected by foreign expeditions, but they developed their own approaches to Silk Road archaeology that emphasized continuity with contemporary Chinese culture rather than exotic difference. The work of scholars like Chen Yingke and Xiang Da demonstrated how Silk Road studies could illuminate the international dimensions of Chinese civilization, while affirming China's central role in maintaining cultural traditions across political upheavals. The archaeological renaissance of Silk Road studies fundamentally changed how the modern world understood ancient globalization. The materials recovered from Central Asian sites provided concrete evidence that sophisticated networks of cultural exchange had connected continents long before the European age of exploration. The discovery of Chinese silk in Roman graves, Indian spices in Central Asian tombs, and Persian glass in Chinese temples demonstrated that ancient civilizations had been far more interconnected than previously imagined. UNESCO and World Heritage. The transformation of Silk Road heritage from archaeological curiosity to global patrimony began with UNESCO's recognition that some sites and traditions transcended national boundaries, requiring international cooperation for their preservation and interpretation. The 1972 World Heritage Convention established the principle that certain cultural and natural sites possessed outstanding universal value that made them the heritage of all humanity, not just the nations within whose borders they happen to be located. UNESCO's initial approach to Silk Road heritage reflected the organization's commitment to using cultural cooperation as a foundation for international peace and understanding. In 1988, UNESCO launched its Integral Study of the Silk Road's Roads of Dialogue project, recognizing that these ancient trade routes represented more than commercial networks. They embodied humanity's capacity for cross-cultural communication and mutual enrichment. The project brought together scholars from over 30 countries to document how ideas, technologies, artistic traditions, and religious beliefs had moved along Silk Road routes, creating shared heritage that connected diverse civilizations. The scholarly research commissioned by UNESCO revealed the complexity of nominating Silk Road sites for World Heritage status. Unlike conventional heritage sites that could be defined by clear geographical boundaries, the Silk Road represented a dynamic network that had evolved over more than a millennium, with routes shifting according to political circumstances, technological innovations, and economic opportunities. Traditional approaches to heritage designation that focused on individual monuments or archaeological sites seemed inadequate for capturing the interconnected nature of Silk Road civilization. UNESCO's solution was to develop the concept of heritage corridors, linear cultural landscapes that encompassed not just individual sites but entire routes with their associated infrastructure, settlement patterns, and cultural traditions. This approach recognized that Silk Road heritage included caravanserais, fortifications, urban centers, religious complexes, and transportation systems that had functioned as integrated networks, supporting long-distance trade and cultural exchange. The first successful application of this corridor approach resulted in the inscription of the Silk Roads, the routes network of Chang'an-Tianshan Corridor, as a World Heritage Site in 2014. This 5,000-kilometer section of the Silk Road network, spanning China, Kazakhstan, and Kyrgyzstan, included 33 component sites that collectively illustrated the development and functioning of Silk Road trade from the 2nd century BCE to the 16th century CE. The nomination required unprecedented cooperation among 3 countries with different political systems, heritage management approaches, and conservation priorities. The preparation process for the Chang'an-Tianshan nomination demonstrated both the possibilities and challenges of international heritage cooperation. Chinese archaeological teams worked with Kazakhstani and Kyrgyz colleagues to develop shared management plans for sites that crossed national borders. They established common conservation standards that could be applied across different legal and administrative systems, created joint research programs that pooled expertise from multiple institutions, and developed tourism strategies that would benefit local communities while protecting archaeological remains. The World Heritage Committee's decision to inscribe the Chang'an-Tianshan corridor was celebrated at a ceremony in Doha, Qatar, where delegates from over 190 countries recognized the universal significance of Silk Road heritage. The inscription represented more than academic achievement. It symbolized the international community's commitment to preserving evidence of humanity's earliest experiments in globalization and cultural exchange. The success of the Chang'an-Tianshan nomination encouraged other countries to pursue similar corridor-based approaches to Silk Road heritage. In 2023, UNESCO inscribed the Zarafshan-Karakum corridor, encompassing sites in Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan that illustrated the southern routes of the Silk Road network. Additional nominations remain under consideration for corridors passing through Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, and other countries that participated in Silk Road trade. The management of World Heritage Silk Road sites has required innovative approaches that address the challenges of protecting heritage across multiple jurisdictions while supporting sustainable development for local communities. The Chang'an-Tianshan Corridor Management Plan established joint committees that coordinate conservation activities among Chinese, Kazakhstani, and Kyrgyz authorities, ensuring that decisions about site maintenance, visitor access, and development projects consider the corridor as an integrated heritage landscape rather than disconnected national sites. Heritage tourism has emerged as both an opportunity and a challenge for Silk Road World Heritage Sites. The designation has increased international awareness and visitor interest, generating economic benefits for remote communities that previously had limited involvement in global tourism networks. However, the fragility of archaeological sites and the remoteness of many locations require careful management to prevent damage from increased visitation, while ensuring that tourism benefits reach local populations. The UNESCO World Heritage Journeys program has developed sustainable tourism strategies specifically for Silk Road sites, emphasizing small group travel, community-based accommodations, and interpretive programs that connect visitors with local heritage traditions. These approaches recognize that Silk Road heritage includes not just ancient monuments, but living cultural practices that continue to evolve in contemporary communities. Digital preservation initiatives have become increasingly important for Silk Road heritage management, particularly given the remoteness and vulnerability of many sites. The International Dunhuang project represents a pioneering effort to create comprehensive digital archives that make Silk Road artifacts accessible to global audiences while protecting originals from damage. High-resolution photography, 3D modeling, and virtual reality technologies allow scholars and the public to study heritage materials with unprecedented detail and immediacy. The development of virtual exhibitions and online educational resources has democratized access to Silk Road heritage, enabling students and researchers worldwide to engage with materials that were previously available only to specialists who could visit major museums. Google Arts and Culture's Common Heritage of the Silk Roads exhibition, developed in collaboration with UNESCO, presents artifacts from museums across Central Asia and beyond, creating virtual reunions of materials that have been geographically dispersed for over a century. Climate change poses emerging challenges for Silk Road heritage preservation that require international cooperation and innovative conservation approaches. Rising temperatures and changing precipitation patterns affect the stability of archaeological sites in desert regions, while extreme weather events threaten structures that have survived for centuries. UNESCO's climate change adaptation strategies for heritage sites include monitoring systems that track environmental conditions at vulnerable locations, and emergency response protocols for protecting sites during natural disasters. The inscription of Silk Road heritage as World Heritage Sites has also raised important questions about ownership, interpretation, and representation that reflect broader debates about decolonizing museums and heritage practice. Some scholars and community representatives have criticized the removal of artifacts from their original contexts during early 20th century expeditions, arguing that Silk Road heritage should be repatriated to the countries and communities where it originated. Modern cultural renaissance. The 21st century has witnessed an extraordinary revival of interest in Silk Road heritage that extends far beyond academic scholarship into popular culture, digital media, and contemporary artistic expression. This modern renaissance reflects both nostalgia for an age of cultural exchange and contemporary anxieties about globalization, creating new forms of cultural memory that blend historical accuracy with creative imagination. The 2014 Netflix series Marco Polo marked a watershed moment in the popular representation of Silk Road heritage, demonstrating both the global appetite for historical drama and the challenges of adapting medieval sources for contemporary audiences. The series' creator John Fusco undertook extensive research that included traveling the actual Silk Road routes by horseback and camel, studying Marco Polo's last will and testament in Venetian archives, and consulting with historians from multiple countries to ensure cultural authenticity. The production faced the complex challenge of representing 13th-century Mongol civilization for 21st-century global audiences. The series featured Mongolian throat singers, employed Mongolian cultural consultants, and filmed in locations across Kazakhstan and Malaysia that could represent the vast landscapes traversed by historical travelers. Yet the series also adapted historical materials to contemporary narrative expectations, emphasizing personal drama and political intrigue over the commercial and cultural exchange that had motivated the historical Marco Polo. Critical reception of the series revealed the continuing tensions surrounding cultural representation and historical accuracy in popular media. Mongolian viewers and cultural experts praised the series for presenting Mongol civilization as sophisticated and complex rather than barbaric. While historians noted significant departures from documented facts about Marco Polo's experiences. The series, cancellation after 2 seasons, demonstrated the commercial challenges of producing historically based content that must satisfy both scholarly standards and entertainment industry demands. The influence of the Netflix series extended beyond television into broader cultural discussions about East-West relations, cultural exchange, and the legacy of historical globalization. The series appeared during a period of increased tension between China and Western nations, making its themes of cross-cultural cooperation and mutual learning particularly resonant for contemporary audiences concerned about growing nationalism and isolationism. Contemporary literature has produced a rich body of fiction and non-fiction works that reimagine Silk Road heritage for modern readers. Authors like Amitav Ghosh, whose novel In an Antique Land traces connections between medieval and contemporary trading networks, have demonstrated how Silk Road themes can illuminate present-day issues of migration, cultural identity, and economic inequality. These works often blend historical research with personal travel narratives, creating hybrid forms that mirror the cultural synthesis characteristic of historical Silk Road literature. The development of heritage tourism along reconstructed Silk Road routes has created new opportunities for experiencing historical landscapes while raising questions about authenticity and commercialization. Countries across Central Asia have invested heavily in tourism infrastructure that allows contemporary travelers to retrace portions of ancient routes, stay in recreated caravanserais, and participate in cultural performances that present traditional arts and crafts. China's Belt and Road Initiative has explicitly invoked Silk Road heritage as justification for contemporary infrastructure development, creating both opportunities and challenges for heritage preservation. The initiative's emphasis on connectivity and cultural exchange echoes historical Silk Road themes while pursuing distinctly modern economic and political objectives. Heritage sites along proposed Belt and Road routes have received increased attention and investment, but also face pressure from development projects that may threaten archaeological remains. Digital technologies have revolutionized how Silk Road heritage is preserved, interpreted, and experienced by global audiences. Virtual reality applications allow users to explore Buddhist cave temples, walk through recreated medieval cities, and handle ancient manuscripts without risking damage to original artifacts. These technologies democratize access to heritage that was previously available only to specialized researchers or visitors who could afford to travel to remote locations. The International Dunhuang project represents the most comprehensive digital heritage initiative focused on Silk Road materials, providing free online access to thousands of manuscripts, paintings, and artifacts from major museum collections worldwide. The project's digitization efforts have revealed new details about historical texts and artworks that were invisible to earlier scholars, enabling discoveries that advance understanding of Silk Road civilization while making heritage materials available to global audiences. Social media platforms have created new communities of Silk Road enthusiasts who share travel experiences, historical discoveries, and cultural interpretations across national and linguistic boundaries. Instagram accounts dedicated to Silk Road heritage attract hundreds of thousands of followers who engage with historical content through visual storytelling, while YouTube channels provide educational content that reaches audiences far beyond traditional academic institutions. The emergence of Silk Road diplomacy as a framework for contemporary international relations reflects the continuing appeal of historical trade routes as metaphors for peaceful cooperation and mutual benefit. Cultural festivals, academic conferences, and artistic exchanges that invoke Silk Road themes provide opportunities for countries to emphasize shared heritage rather than political differences, creating forms of cultural diplomacy that echo the historical role of trade routes in facilitating communication between diverse civilizations. Contemporary artists across Asia and beyond have drawn inspiration from Silk Road heritage to create works that address modern themes of migration, cultural identity, and global connection. Multimedia installations, dance performances, and musical collaborations that blend traditional forms from different Silk Road cultures create new artistic languages that reflect both historical exchange and contemporary cultural synthesis. The COVID-19 pandemic has intensified interest in digital forms of cultural engagement while highlighting the fragility of heritage tourism dependent on international travel. Virtual museum tours, online cultural festivals, and digital educational programs developed during pandemic restrictions have created new models for heritage engagement that may persist as permanent alternatives to physical travel. Gaming and interactive media have created immersive experiences that allow users to participate in simulated Silk Road journeys, making economic decisions about trade routes, cultural choices about religious practices, and diplomatic negotiations between different civilizations. These applications often blend historical accuracy with creative storytelling, creating educational entertainment that introduces young audiences to Silk Road heritage through familiar digital interfaces. The proliferation of Silk Road-themed restaurants, hotels, and cultural centers in major cities worldwide reflects the commercial appeal of heritage brands that evoke exotic travel and cultural sophistication. These establishments often blend architectural elements, decorative motifs, and culinary traditions from multiple Silk Road cultures, creating eclectic environments that mirror the cultural synthesis characteristic of historical trading centers. Academic institutions have developed new programs and research initiatives that apply contemporary methodological approaches to Silk Road heritage, including digital humanities projects that analyze large data sets of historical texts, archaeological investigations that employ remote sensing and scientific analysis techniques, and interdisciplinary collaborations that combine historical research with environmental science, economics, and cultural studies. Threads across time. In the quiet halls of the British Museum, where climate-controlled galleries preserve silk banners that once fluttered in Central Asian winds over a millennium ago, visitors from every continent gather to witness humanity's earliest experiments in global connection. The Stein Galleries house treasures that Wang Yuanlu discovered in his desert cave, now illuminated by LED lights that reveal colors more vivid than any medieval pilgrim could have imagined by candlelight. Children from London schools study Chinese characters painted on Buddhist scrolls, while elderly Chinese tourists recognize familiar calligraphy in scripts they learned decades ago, creating moments of recognition that bridge centuries and cultures. The museum experience itself embodies the continuing evolution of Silk Road heritage, how ancient objects acquire new meanings through contemporary encounters, how global audiences discover personal connections to distant histories, how heritage institutions balance preservation with access in an interconnected world. The gallery labels translate Sanskrit terms into English, explain Sogdian trading practices to European visitors, and contextualize Buddhist iconography for secular audiences, creating new forms of cultural interpretation that serve educational purposes Marco Polo and Ibn Battuta could never have anticipated. Yet the museum galleries represent only one dimension of how Silk Road heritage continues to evolve in contemporary life. In Samarkand's restored Registan, where tourists photograph the same architectural monuments that amazed medieval travelers, local artisans demonstrate traditional crafts that connect them to centuries of specialized knowledge. The silk weavers, metalworkers, and ceramic artists who sell their products to international visitors practice techniques that have been refined through generations of cultural exchange, embodying living heritage that connects past innovation with present creativity. The challenges facing contemporary heritage preservation mirror many of the obstacles that confronted historical Silk Road travelers. Climate change threatens archaeological sites just as natural disasters once disrupted trade routes. Political tensions between nations complicate international cooperation just as territorial conflicts once forced merchants to find alternative paths. Economic pressures on local communities create dilemmas about development versus preservation that echo historical tensions between immediate needs and long-term cultural value. Yet the solutions emerging from contemporary heritage practice also reflect the adaptive strategies that enabled Silk Road civilization to flourish across centuries of political change and technological innovation. Digital preservation techniques allow heritage materials to be shared globally while protecting originals from damage, creating virtual networks that parallel the physical networks that connected historical trading centers. International partnerships between museums, universities, and cultural institutions enable collaborative research and conservation projects that transcend national boundaries, fostering the same spirit of cooperation that enabled historical merchants to conduct business across cultural divides. The development of sustainable heritage tourism demonstrates how contemporary communities can benefit economically from their historical legacy, while preserving cultural authenticity for future generations. Community-based tourism initiatives in Kyrgyzstan allow visitors to stay with nomadic families who practice traditional pastoralism, creating cultural exchanges that provide income for remote communities, while preserving ways of life that connect to historical Silk Road traditions. These programs recognize that heritage includes not just monuments and artifacts, but living practices that continue to evolve through contemporary application. Educational initiatives that teach Silk Road history in schools worldwide reflect growing recognition that cultural exchange and international cooperation are skills that must be cultivated through historical understanding. Students who learn about Marco Polo's adaptability to Chinese court culture, Ibn Battuta's openness to diverse Islamic traditions, and Sogdian merchants' multilingual business practices develop perspectives on cultural difference and similarity that serve them in an increasingly connected world. The digital humanities projects that analyze thousands of Silk Road manuscripts using artificial intelligence demonstrate how contemporary technology can reveal patterns and connections that were invisible to earlier generations of scholars. Machine learning algorithms that can identify linguistic borrowings across Central Asian languages, analyze trade networks through archaeological distributions, and map cultural influences through artistic motifs create new forms of knowledge that enhance understanding of how historical globalization functioned. Contemporary artistic collaborations that bring together musicians, dancers, and visual artists from different Silk Road countries create new cultural syntheses that honor historical traditions while addressing present-day themes. These projects often receive support from international cultural organizations and government cultural diplomacy programs, reflecting official recognition that cultural cooperation can build understanding between nations, just as it did between historical kingdoms and empires. The Belt and Road Initiative's explicit invocation of Silk Road heritage demonstrates how historical memory continues to influence contemporary policymaking, though not without controversy. Critics argue that modern infrastructure development threatens archaeological sites and disrupts traditional communities, while supporters contend that economic development can provide resources for heritage preservation and cultural education. These debates reflect enduring tensions about how heritage should be used to justify contemporary projects, and whose voices should be heard in making decisions about cultural legacy. Environmental challenges increasingly affect Silk Road heritage sites as climate change alters the conditions that have preserved archaeological materials for centuries. Rising temperatures and changing precipitation patterns threaten the stability of mud brick structures that have survived in desert environments, while extreme weather events pose immediate risks to fragile monuments. International conservation efforts are developing new techniques for protecting heritage sites from environmental damage, while adapting management strategies to address changing conditions. The emergence of heritage studies as an academic discipline reflects growing recognition that cultural preservation requires interdisciplinary approaches that combine historical research with conservation science, community engagement, and policy analysis. Universities worldwide now offer programs that train heritage professionals to work with diverse stakeholders, apply new technologies, and address contemporary challenges while maintaining scholarly rigor and cultural sensitivity. As the world becomes increasingly connected through digital networks, the Silk Road serves as a historical precedent that demonstrates both the benefits and challenges of cultural exchange. The same networks that enable global communication and commerce today also facilitate the spread of misinformation, cultural conflict, and economic inequality, echoing historical patterns where Silk Road routes carried diseases and military technologies, alongside beneficial innovations and cultural enrichment. The enduring appeal of Silk Road heritage reflects humanity's persistent desire to understand how different peoples can live together peacefully while maintaining their distinct cultural identities. In an era of rising nationalism and cultural polarization, the historical example of Silk Road civilization offers evidence that diversity can be a source of strength rather than division, that economic cooperation can transcend political differences, and that cultural exchange enriches rather than threatens local traditions. The story of Wang Yuanlu's discovery connects directly to contemporary debates about cultural ownership and global heritage. When the monk opened his hidden chamber in 1900, he could not have anticipated that the manuscripts and artifacts he found would become central to discussions about museum ethics, digital repatriation, and community involvement in heritage management. The ongoing international Dunhuang project represents an attempt to address these concerns by making materials freely available online to scholars and communities worldwide, regardless of where the physical objects are currently housed. The preservation challenges facing Silk Road heritage sites today mirror the obstacles that confronted historical travelers and traders. Just as ancient merchants had to navigate political instabilities, natural disasters, and technological limitations, contemporary heritage professionals must address climate change, limited funding, and competing development pressures while maintaining the integrity of sites that have survived for centuries. The solutions require the same qualities of adaptability, cooperation, and long-term thinking that enabled Silk Road civilization to flourish across political and cultural boundaries. The digital renaissance of Silk Road heritage demonstrates how contemporary technology can serve historical understanding while creating new forms of cultural connection. Virtual reality experiences that allow users to walk through reconstructed Buddhist temples, artificial intelligence programs that decode previously untranslatable manuscripts, and social media platforms that connect heritage enthusiasts across continents create opportunities for engagement that transcend the limitations of physical travel and geographic distance. Yet technology alone cannot preserve heritage without human commitment to the values that make cultural preservation meaningful. The volunteers who digitize manuscripts, the local guides who share traditional knowledge with visitors, The scholars who spend decades learning obscure languages, and the community members who maintain traditional crafts, all embody the same spirit of cultural stewardship that motivated medieval monks to copy precious texts and merchants to carry delicate artifacts across dangerous routes. The influence of Silk Road heritage on contemporary culture extends beyond museums and academic institutions into everyday life. The fusion cuisines that blend Asian and European traditions, the architectural styles that combine Eastern and Western elements, the artistic movements that draw inspiration from cross-cultural exchange, and the philosophical approaches that synthesize different wisdom traditions, all reflect the continuing influence of Silk Road patterns of cultural interaction. Educational programs that teach Silk Road history help students develop skills for navigating cultural difference in an interconnected world. When children learn about Sogdian merchants who spoke multiple languages to conduct business across cultural boundaries, they develop appreciation for multilingualism as a practical skill, rather than an academic requirement. When students study the religious tolerance that characterized many Silk Road cities, they gain historical perspective on contemporary debates about diversity and inclusion. The heritage tourism industry that has developed around Silk Road sites creates economic opportunities for communities that might otherwise have limited connection to global markets, while also preserving traditional knowledge and practices that connect to historical traditions. The nomadic families in Kyrgyzstan who offer homestays to travelers share skills in horsemanship, traditional crafts and environmental knowledge that have been refined through generations of adaptation to Central Asian landscapes. International collaboration in Silk Road heritage preservation demonstrates how contemporary institutions can embody the cooperative spirit that characterized historical trade networks. When Chinese, Kazakhstani, and Kyrgyz archaeologists work together to manage World Heritage sites that cross national boundaries, they create practical examples of how different political systems can cooperate to serve shared cultural values. The ongoing discoveries of new archaeological sites along Silk Road routes remind us that heritage is not a fixed collection of known monuments but a continuing process of discovery and interpretation. The 2024 discoveries of the medieval cities Tugunbulak and Tashbulak in the Pamir Mountains demonstrate that significant aspects of Silk Road civilization remain unknown, waiting for future scholars and local communities to uncover and interpret. Climate change poses unprecedented challenges for heritage preservation that require innovative solutions combining traditional knowledge with contemporary technology. The communities that have lived along Silk Road routes for generations possess environmental knowledge that can inform adaptation strategies, while new conservation techniques can help protect vulnerable sites from changing conditions. The debates surrounding the Belt and Road Initiative's relationship to historical Silk Road heritage reflect broader questions about how the past should inform present policy. While the initiative's emphasis on connectivity and cooperation echoes historical themes, critics argue that contemporary economic development can threaten the archaeological sites and traditional communities that embody Silk Road heritage. These discussions demonstrate the continuing relevance of historical precedents for contemporary decision-making. Cultural diplomacy programs that invoke Silk Road heritage provide alternatives to purely political or economic approaches to international relations. When countries collaborate on heritage preservation, academic exchanges, and cultural festivals that celebrate shared traditions, they create opportunities for building understanding that transcends temporary political disagreements. The emergence of heritage studies as an academic discipline reflects growing recognition that cultural preservation requires specialized knowledge and professional training. Universities worldwide now offer programs that combine historical research, conservation science, community engagement, and policy analysis, preparing graduates to address the complex challenges facing heritage sites in an era of rapid global change. As the world confronts challenges of cultural polarization, environmental degradation, and economic inequality, Silk Road Heritage offers historical examples of how different communities have successfully addressed similar problems through cooperation, adaptation, and mutual respect. The merchants who learned multiple languages to conduct business across cultural boundaries, the rulers who welcomed foreign scholars and artists to enrich their courts, and the communities that developed sustainable practices for managing scarce resources, all provide models for contemporary problem-solving. The continuing evolution of Silk Road heritage in contemporary culture demonstrates that historical memory is not passive preservation of the past, but active engagement with traditions that can inform present choices and future possibilities. Whether expressed through museum exhibitions, digital archives, educational programs, artistic collaborations, or community-based tourism, Silk Road heritage continues to inspire new forms of cultural connection that honor historical achievements while addressing contemporary needs. In the end, the true legacy of the Silk Road lies not in any single artifact or archaeological site, but in the enduring human capacity for building bridges across differences, creating prosperity through cooperation, and enriching local traditions through openness to external influences. The stories preserved in Wang Yuanlu's cave, the experiences recorded by Marco Polo and Ibn Battuta, and the artifacts displayed in museums worldwide, all testify to this fundamental aspect of human nature. Our ability to find common ground with strangers, to learn from foreign experiences, and to create something beautiful from the meeting of different worlds. As contemporary travelers follow reconstructed Silk Road routes, as scholars decode newly discovered manuscripts, as artists create works inspired by cross-cultural traditions, and as communities develop sustainable approaches to heritage preservation, they participate in the same essential human project that motivated ancient merchants to load their camels with silk and spices, Buddhist monks to copy sacred texts, and local guides to share their knowledge with foreign visitors. The road continues, as it always has, toward distant horizons, where new partnerships await and ancient dreams of connection find fresh expression in each generation's efforts to build a more cooperative and understanding world. The silk threads that once connected distant markets have been replaced by fiber optic cables that carry information at the speed of light, yet the fundamental human desire for connection, learning, and mutual enrichment remains unchanged. In every act of cultural preservation, every moment of cross-cultural understanding, every effort to build bridges rather than walls, the spirit of the Silk Road lives on, not as nostalgia for a vanished past, but as inspiration for creating a future worthy of humanity's highest aspirations for peaceful cooperation and shared prosperity.